Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about timed grazing today and the impact it's making and hopefully will make on ranching across Utah and the West. Joining us for a conversation are people who are very experienced at this particular topic. One of the permittees of the Three Creek grazing area, Dale Lamborn. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And we also have Troy Forrest, who is the GIP manager. I think that stands for Grazing Improvement Program for the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. Thanks for joining us today.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, so already in the show, we've basically learned the concept of timed grazing, how it's different than rotational grazing, or might be rotational grazing on steroids or whatever, but we get the picture. But we haven't really looked at what it actually took to not be a 50,000 acre ranch owner like Deseret Livestock and make it all work for you guys. When this concept was first discussed with you, Dale, as a permittee, did you just go, whoa, wait a minute, or what was your response to it?
Well, I think there were some critical concerns I had going in. First of all, you've got to get 36 permittees to agree and jump on board of the plan. You got to get BLM and Forest Service to work together, which is not always easy to do. And you've got to have a plan that makes sense both for the resource, for the permittees, for the agencies. And so, yeah, it was a big challenge going into it. But the amazing thing is that we've got everybody on board and we're there.
Who came up with the idea originally to say, let's repeat Deseret Land and Livestock and let's put it out there with some smaller allotments?
Well, it was Alvin Shaw that came to Bill Hopkin and I. Alvin's a permittee on the allotments. He, 40 years ago, worked at Deseret as a cowboy and had rode that range and saw the condition he was in, and then he had moved to Wyoming and run a family ranch for about 25 years. Came back to Rich County and in about 2010 went on a tour on Deseret and saw the marked change in the results, in the ground cover, in the wildlife that were there, in everything about Deseret. And so he came to us and he says, they did that there, why can't we do it on public lands? And so with Alvin's help, we got together with BLM and Forest Service and started having the conversation.
Okay, so we're very blessed to have agencies like the BLM and the Forest Service around, but typically they're kind of a very rigid organization. What was their first reaction when you say, okay, I want you to do something you've never done before and let these ranchers group stuff together?
Well, they were pretty good, I'll be honest. They had good people there. They knew there were some resource problems in the area, and they were looking for ways to address them. And so we approached them with this, and they said, wow, that'll be hard. And they started talking about NEPA and the time it'll take. And, he says, well, tell us, worst case scenario, how long is it going to take to do this? And they said, well, if everything goes just wrong, it'll take 3 or 4 years. It's now been almost 8. So
okay, that part's
pretty predictable. But surprisingly, they were very amenable. And the hardest part, or one of the hardest parts, is they've had to be amenable 4 or 5 times because they've had 4 or 5 managers in each agency in that period of time. And each time a new manager comes in, you almost have to start from scratch and get them to buy off and be willing to move forward. And that's part of the extra time that we took. You get one manager very comfortable with it, things are moving forward, and all of a sudden they get the transfer, they get the better job, more pay, and so they move, and the new person comes in and you have to start at ground zero. And
you'd think they'd leave an envelope in their desk saying, hey, this is a good thing, to whoever the predecessor was.
You would hope to, and that was always the claim, but it seemed like we always had to start.
There was always an education process with whomever.
So, was it scary? Was it really scary for you to think about turning in your allotment to the BLM? Or is yours Forest Service or BLM, or do you have a little bit of both?
I have some of both. And we didn't really turn it into them. What we did was form an LLC. And so all 36 permittees are now part of the Three Creeks Grazing LLC. So we're all managing partners, if you will. We have a board of directors that does the day-to-day kind of thing. But everybody, even though the LLC holds the grazing permit, we all still have our share of ownership in the LLC.
Correct. As I was talking before we started taping to Troy, it's kind of like a resort condominium. You buy timeshare when you actually own part of the real estate. You have an undivided interest in a larger property. You're not renting it, and you don't own 1/39th or 1/36th of the entire project. You own 1/36th of the whole thing. So I guess in concept, for you guys that are real estate investors, now it makes sense, right? But you know, you have to put a lot of trust in these other 35 guys, don't you?
Well, we've got a lot of trust in not only the other permittees, but we've got to trust the agencies. We've got to trust the research that says it's going to be a good thing for the resource. Because in Rich County, agriculture is still king in terms of our economy.
Oh, yeah.
And we are very dependent on grazing on public lands. It's the only way that cow-calf production is feasible in Rich County. And so if we're looking for our kids and our grandkids to continue a way of life that we absolutely love, that we want to pass down from generation to generation, we got to make sure that we're doing the best we can for the resource, so that BLM and Forest Service are going to allow grandkids to run cows on that.
So when Deseret Livestock started this, they actually found that they were able to support wildlife better, have better range conditions because they were moving the cattle more frequently, and it actually allowed them to increase the number of cattle they ran on their property. So they actually saw a net gain in the cow-calf numbers that they were putting out on the range. Am I correct in that?
You are correct. They almost doubled their stocking range. So yeah.
Okay. How are you guys going to divide up that extra cattle capacity?
Well, I'm not sure we'll get that. You know, that's a hope that we have, but Forest Service and BLM aren't ready to commit to that yet. They're going to look at the results at the end of some time and then evaluate, and if we do that, it's going to be another application process, you know. But if we can keep from losing AUMs, if we can keep from losing time, it's a net benefit to us. So I'm not saying we want to maintain status quo. We want to get better. But if we're improving the resource, if we can stay out there, if we can do those things, that's going to be a gain. And in 10 years, if we can show the same kind of results that Deseret's shown, then we'll have some data to go to the agencies with.
Does Deseret have any public land permits, or do they own their ranch outright? I don't know.
They have about 205,000 acres under one fence, and they have about 15,000 acres of BLM that's fenced in within that fence in a checkerboard pattern where it's every other section, and that is mostly on the far eastern part of the ranch. And they do have a permit there, a private permit it's called, where they have a permit with BLM only to run on that ground. So vast majority, 90% plus of the ranch is private, but there is about 15,000 acres of BLM.
So that really, the BLM doesn't really stick their nose into what production is and range production is on Deseret unless they invite them in for a tour then.
They don't. BLM has the right to access their property and has to work with Deseret to do that, but it is within their fence. And they just went through their permit renewal, and there were some protests and appeals, and that started to go to court, and then here in December those appeals were withdrawn. The environmental groups that made those appeals withdrew that, and so now Deseret just had their permit renewed for 10 years, and so they won't have any issues for 10 years going forward. And talking about Three Creeks, we initially talked about that as we put together the environmental analysis as to how do we capture the extra AUMs. And we as the state wanted to push for that now. The BLM and Forest Service were very reticent, as Dale said, but they have said that after 10 years, we'll get a 10-year permit renewal this first time, that they are willing to address it again. And so we'll hold them to that we look at capturing that. But the biggest thing for these guys is I think 5 out of the last 10 years, they've had to come home a month earlier more. And we know that once we get in this system that we'll be more drought proof, that those cows won't have to come home early. And in Rich County, your cows going home early is a big deal because that's that much more hay you're going to have to buy. And the more hay you buy, the less money you make
when they're sold on the hoof. That makes sense. So at the end of 10 years, if this doesn't work out, do you guys get your original allotments back? Or are they gone forever?
No, they're not gone forever. I think Troy might could answer that better than I could. We have what we always had. We've got a permit that then would be redistributed out of the LLC, and how that would look I'm not sure either one of us know exactly, but I don't, at least in my view, I haven't given up my permit. I've joined it with the other permittees. We formed a partnership that'll hopefully make us have a little more clout as we put all 36 of us together. But I don't view it as risking my permit.
Is this a more secure way for you as a permit holder to ranch, as far as, you know, if when you're holding permits, there's certain restrictions on whose cows can be there, and you know, do you see some safeguards in it?
Well, I see some safeguards. What this does, very honestly, in my opinion, is it puts, and the folks from GIP have been very upfront with us in this, it puts a lot of responsibility on us to make sure this works. Mm-hmm. I mean, Three Creeks LLC, we're going to be monitoring ourselves to a big extent. I mean, we're still going to report to Forest Service and BLM, but if we get lazy, if we don't rotate properly, if we don't get cows moved when they should be moved, you know, that's all going to negatively impact this. So we've put a lot of trust in each other and committed that we're going to make this work. And it's going to be more work. You know, anytime you rotate pastures, that's time you got to leave the hayfield and go move cows. Right. Anytime that you've, you know, right now I'm in the part of the New Canyon grazing, we only have 3 pastures to rotate. When we get rotating significantly more than that, it's going to be more work. But if we can enhance the resource, if we can bring home fatter calves, and if we can stay, if we can stay out there longer, yeah, the benefit to us is going to be significant. And we're hopeful, looking at what's happened in Deseret, looking at what the research from Utah State says, that all is going to happen. And so we're basing our risk, I guess, on research that we believe is going to prove out.
Wow.
And I think that's an important point that Dale makes, is they're stepping up. This isn't easier. I mean, it's easier. We've got some of the allotments now of the 10 that are included in this where they turn them out May 15th and they don't go back and check really for the most part until September 15th when those cows come home. That's all going to change. They're going to have to be there on a daily, weekly basis making the moves. And it's going to cost up front because cows and calves are going to get separated. They're going to have dogies. There's going to be some issues. And the first several years, the cows may not gain more weight. And we've tried to be upfront about that, and I think Dale would say that we have been, that there's some risks associated with this, and they're putting skin in the game.
So, for your point, you know, my place is right at the head of one of the forks of Otter Creek, which is where some of the Three Creeks name comes from. I have always been able to turn out my gate, and when they come home in the fall, they come to my gate. With this, to go to a pasture that's going to be somewhere different, I've got to get them there. I got to get them paired up. When we come home in the fall, they're not going to be right at my gate. So it's going to be more work, but hopefully it's going to make an improvement on the resource.
Are fences coming down inside the allotments, or are they checkerboarded?
Well, we've got the existing fences for the allotment. There's quite a bit of that. And then we're building, I think, 20 or 30 more miles of fence to subdivide. Mm-hmm. But that's part of what the scale of this did, is it gave us the existing fences to put more cows in a pasture. We didn't have to create a whole bunch more pastures. We didn't have to build a whole bunch more fence. Now I agree 40 miles sounds like a bunch more fence, but when there's already 200 miles up there, 40 more is not that much more in comparison. And so Deseret had that same advantage. They had the advantage of scale. You know, there's not very many 200,000 acre private lands ranches in the West, let alone in Utah. Yeah. And so that economy that comes with being at scale is what we're trying to take advantage of, so we don't have to put in all the extra infrastructure. There's plenty going in with this, but it's way less, and you couldn't do it economically on just the New Canyon allotment where Dale currently runs. You have to have that scale in order to make this work.
So if you put all your cows together, and I don't know if they're literally going to be together in the same pasture, but if all permit holders have their herd together, can't you guys help each other move them around?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And actually, there's going to be, I mentioned earlier, about 3,200 head of cows. There's going to be basically 2 herds, so there'll be 16 in each herd. Right. And yeah, and we've always helped each other. You don't go out and just move yours. When you go to move from pasture to pasture, you move everybody's, and that's one of the great parts about it. I mean, as independent as ranchers are, and they're way more independent than almost any agricultural group, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a certain camaraderie of taking care of each other, moving cows together, being on your horse, and as I mentioned before, I don't want to get all sentimental about it, but having your kids with you while you do that, pass on that way of life, because moving cows with a bunch of other ranchers is a lot more fun than irrigating with Dad.
You know,
If you're going to make them love this, you got to have some of the fun that goes with it.
No, that's absolutely true. And you know, the thing is that is such a consistent message. So you guys living in the city, and you keep hearing these ranchers all over the state talk about the way of life and their family and a great way to raise their kids. These are not talking points that are coming from like some political action group. These guys really feel this. So how are you going to divide up if this goes back to the theoretical question? Sure. Your conditions improve on the range to a point where the Forest Service, the BLM, look at it and say, yeah, much as we'd like to not say yes, you can run more cows. How are you going to divide up the growth between the allotment holders?
Well, we're in on a percent. You know, each of us have so many permits now, and that's a percentage of the total. So if we get more, they will be distributed on a percentage of the total based on your percentage existing.
So are you rebranding them as LLC? You're keeping your own cows within the allotment. You're just sharing the ground, not the stock.
Yeah, all of the brands are registered by the LLC, and so they'll be branded the different brands. Otherwise, it'd be a nightmare when you came home to try to sort back everybody's cows and calves.
Gee, that Lamborn guy, he ended up with all the skinny cows. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here.
That might create some problems. So no, everybody maintains ownership of their livestock.
Okay. Are there any, this show actually gets seen all across Utah. There's a big chunk of Nevada that sees the show over the air. One county in Colorado, the bottom end of Wyoming. So there are other guys out here, there are other groups of ranchers that are looking at this right now to go, what's the one thing you want to tell them?
I think from my perspective, it's based on trust. We trusted Troy and his group as they came in and initiated the idea. We've put a lot of trust in each other. We've trusted the agencies. But, Covey, a number of years ago, wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And trust makes things happen faster, and it makes things happen better. And so I think that base level of trust between the permittees, the agencies, GIP, all the people involved is critical to this even getting off the ground. Mm-hmm. And I think traditionally we've not trusted each other enough. And if we're going to move forward, benefit the resource, we got to trust each other selectively. What was Reagan's old saying? Trust and verify.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're at.
Yeah. Well, that's actually excellent. It looks like a great program. And I appreciate you guys taking the time to join us today. Any last thoughts?
I would just say that this is an opportunity for ranchers. It's been a war of attrition in the West. In 1934, the Taylor Grazing Act was passed, and at that time we had a set level of grazing. Since 1960 in Utah, we've lost about 2/3 of the grazing capacity that we had on public lands. And we've got to stop that attrition in this industry if we're going to keep these rural communities in these small counties in Utah viable. And this is a way forward. This is a way that can be ecologically and economically sustainable, to where we don't have to see a continued reduction in numbers. We can go out, we can be good stewards, which takes more effort on the part of the permittees, but we get better results. We get that clean water. We get the wildlife that everybody wants in abundance. We get those values that everybody wants from their public lands and should get. And we still maintain the economic viability of our ranchers. And yes, it takes effort, but I see this as the way forward into the future. That we can do this, if we can prove it here, we can do it everywhere else and be successful. And so that's my great hope, is that I've watched that war of attrition. Came from a small ranching family in Monticello. I've seen permits cut over and over the years. There was big cuts in the 60s. There was big cuts again in the 80s. We can't keep our ranchers in business if we have big cuts in the 2000s.
It's interesting because mostly the only thing I ever hear is it goes one way. There become less AUMs, never more.
Right.
which is why this becomes such a big deal, is saying if you guys can really prove up that this is really good for the habitat, are they going to let you guys capitalize on it, or are they just going to wait for it to overgrow and burn? You know,
Well, we think there's opportunity for
say that?
capitalization. We really do. You know, we think that we're going to be asked in the future because we can make profit by removing that fuel. That's a good thing. It's got to be a good thing. If we can't, you know, we can't always incur costs to make things better. If we can make money and make things better at the same time, which is what this will do, that's a win-win for everybody, is it not?
It really is. Well, congratulations to you. Thank you for joining us. We'll be right back with the County Seat. We'll continue our conversation about timed grazing, and we will look at the people that started it up in Rich County and see exactly how well it's benefited them as we take a tour of Deseret Land and Livestock when we come back.